And the lines are open 011-542-2186. In studio, we're joined by Mr. Hendrik Makanete, education activist, Gabelo Ontekiso, Progressive Student Movement President, and Thabo Moloja, SASCO President. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. How far are we from having access to the feasibility into the fees or free higher education report?
Well, that question will depend on the response by government, particularly the president, as he interrogates the fees report, as he's about to make, a pronouncement on it. So for us to know whether we are closer or whether we are a bit far, it will depend on, of course, the response by government and, of course, the new Minister of Higher Education as well. But from where we are sitting, we believe that, higher education is, free higher education is long overdue. It's about time that we find a way to accommodate the poorest of the poor so that they can be able to access free education without, higher education without any problem.
I mean, this was a resolution taken, 10 odd years ago in terms of the ANC then elective conference, I think, of Polokwane. And as you are saying, it's long overdue. What is taking so long? We've heard even from the business sector and other education reformers saying that the money can be found if we shave off some of the wasteful expenditure that we're seeing. Mr. Makineta, do you think that indeed the money is there?
Well, I think the money is there, particularly also in the private sector. But we have not seen a commitment, from the private sector in as far as this debate is concerned. They are sitting at the back seat. They have taken a back seat, and, they want to make it a responsibility of government alone. And, we are quite, we are not really 100% sure that government alone can be able to proceed with a free quality education. We still believe that the private sector must come on board to make sure that they make a significant contribution. But so far, it is not happening.
All right, let's get a voice or perspective from Thabo Moloja, SASCO President. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. Do you have a better or renewed hope now that Professor Hlengiwe Mkhize has taken the reins in higher education? Or was it too soon to call?
Hi, Cindy, and to the gentlemen in studio. Look, really, for us, we don't believe that who is a minister in higher education affects the whole question of free education. The president, correctly so, I'm saying correctly because this requires a political call at the top government, took this matter out of the Department of Education and Training by establishing a presidential commission and not a ministerial commission. So it is now in the hands of the president. I was even saying to tomorrow, even if a bed can be delivery of free education, not depend on that bed. If a professor, we had a doctor, even if we can put a miss, you will not put any difference. The issue here is ministers have a role to play. Yes, we welcomed at SASCO the appointment of Professor Hlengiwe Mkhize as no strategy to higher education. We welcomed the appointment of Mr. Putina, former youth leader.
Yeah, Thabo, just move around a bit. Sorry, we're losing you there. Just pick up your thought.
I'm saying, but we believe that the whole question of education really sits with the president. It was resolved the conference which he had president of the ANC and of the country in Polokwane 10 years ago, and is dependent on the president now and his mission. He has been sitting on the report for almost 2 months. He is not communicating. That we actually even really that he cannot.
Yeah.
By not communicating.
Yeah, your line is terrible, Thabo. We just please move around. We'll come back to you. Charles in Mosina, good evening to you, and thanks for your call.
Yes, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm fine.
What's your comment or question?
Yes, my question really is concerning the issue of the minister who's soon right now in. From the former minister who's Lady Mutsimande, what was the delay or what was the cause before the former minister to make assure to the student to say the one who's soon in today will solve the problems that are affecting the students of South Africa? I also like to indicate if it's also do the same thing, the new minister do the same thing, delay, come up with some other commissions, what will be assisting the South African student in order to get the free education? This is the question that I'm having. Facing the challenges that we are facing, even the president make a solution by putting the new minister in place to solve the problem that make a crisis within the basic education minister.
Yeah, okay. I hear you, Charles, saying that, you know, it may not make a difference if the minister is not empowered or given the necessary resources to implement free higher education for students. Mangoba, good evening to you and thanks for joining us.
Yes, how are you, Cindy?
I'm fine, how are you?
I'm superb. Okay, I would like to start by saying I thank Jacob Zuma for what he did. Firing blame the mandem, it was very great. But then my comment will be, the thing, it is impossible for South Africans to have free education while all our universities, they still owned by white people. So I don't think in the near future there will be a such, unless if we have the black banks, we have black insurance, all of those things they are owned by us, then free education.
Mangoba, you're touching on the issue of decolonization of our education, Mr. Makinita. In what form is that going to take? Does it mean that we need to establish what used to be in the Bantu stands, predominantly institutions for black people with the black content and curricula? Or does it mean that the current structures need to be reviewed, and what's the process going forward?
Well, I don't think that we need to discriminate, against other races. To decolonize, that we have to do within the context of what we have, and maintaining the infrastructure that we have. All these universities, former or historical white institutions, which are of course making a significant contribution to the academic life of our students, but also to ensure that we don't lose sight of where we come from as a nation and also as a continent. So I think that the issue of decolonization must go ahead. It's about time. We've really, it's also long overdue, and of course we don't necessarily have to have black universities or we have to actually ensure that within the context of what we have, we decolonize.
And Ataba, I mean, the issue is really much more complex and multi-pronged in that it's not just access or monetary access to higher education. It has to deal with other support structures, accommodation, whether students have got enough to eat, and the content in itself is relevant to modern day South Africa and by extension the continent.
Quite correct, Cindy. Quite correct. And I think I agree with Mr. Makinita there. Look, the whole SASCO debate and argument around free education is not fees. It's free to allow one to access it without hindrance, free for one to enter in it and succeed in it without these systematic challenges of racism, systemic challenges of exclusion, systemic challenges of this and that. Because you will see really, if, say for example, the ANC pronouncement of the Lekgotla, which we welcomed and we anticipate that the president will pronounce in line with it, which said from next year there will be grants for the poor to enter higher education, for example. You will be the higher education will be exposed that it is not just the problems of finances. There will be other challenges that are going to emerge and will continue to face. Issues of where students will continue to be closed out, even if government is prepared to fund their complete education. So you have a lot of those challenges, and this is where the role of the minister comes through, where the transformation of the sector, whether you call it decolonizing or transformation, but the changing of ivory tower institutions into people-centered institutions, where you can go to West, you can go to UCT, you can go to Stellenbosch, you can go to University of Free State, former Afrikaner, former white institutions, UP, for example, and you are able to succeed in these institutions without being excluded on the basis of color, on the basis of gender, and without being oppressed So it's some of those challenges that I think the new ministry will have to grapple with. The whole question of the TVET sector. Sometimes we think that the challenges of higher education are just about universities. Well, they're about the whole sector of higher education, which also includes agricultural colleges, nursing colleges, as well as the technical and vocational colleges that we have in the country, which are much needed to drive industrialization, to drive skilling the youth of this country.
Yeah,
and so on.
Thabo, just hold the thought. We have Mtweni in Boksburg and Mtunzi in Cape Town. We'll start with Mtweni in Boksburg. Good evening to you. Hi, Mtweni. Mtweni, can you hear us? Okay, let's go. Hi, how are you? I'm good.
So low, I can't hear you properly.
All right, I'm as loud as I can be, and this is an open studio, open set, so everybody around me can hear me. You might want to turn up your volume on your handset. Can you hear us now? Let's go to Mpumzi in Cape Town. Good evening to you.
Hello, good evening. Cindy, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, Cindy. I'd like to comment on this free education matter. I'm Pumzi from Cape Town. I'm a student at the University of the Western Cape. Free education is possible in South Africa. And free education is not just possible in South Africa, it is possible together with decolonization. But what is lacking in South Africa is a political will to drive free education. You know, Cindy, if you can compare a country such as Cuba to the country which is South Africa, compare the two, compare the economics, compare the GDP, compare everything. Cuba does not stand anything to South Africa in terms of economical development. Cuba's economy is not diversified at all. But Cuba had a will to create free education because they understood that they will need free education in order for them to lessen the problems of poverty in their country, which was impoverished by the Western powers. So in South Africa, it's just political will from the government to actually implement on free education and to stand and say it is time for free education. It is very possible.
I think we live by faith, Mpumzi, and hope that the new minister and the reshuffle will mean something, particularly in light of the free education. As Mpumzi is saying, that we have a number of excellent examples of how it can be done if you draw on the international benchmark and even on some of the African countries. Why then has it not been done in South Africa? If indeed it's about a lack of political will, what would motivate that lack?
Well, as the caller has just indicated, perhaps now that we have the injection of people like Buti Manamela in the Ministry of Higher Education, we'll probably see a lot of developments. Why I'm saying this? Because we know Buti Manamela is one of those who comes from within the ranks of the student movement itself. In actual fact, at some point, he was the deputy president of SASCO, and he's the one who was championing the call for free higher education. Remember, this is not a new call. It has been championed first by SASCO in the early 90s. And we believe that, the arrival of Buti Manamela gives hope, actually, to the issue of free higher education. We believe that he can be able to take it up with the necessary agency, unlike the previous ministers, if you can recall, those who led higher education before. A young person is there who's vibrant and who has been actively involved within he understands the issues.
Yeah, he's closer to the needs of the masses. Let's go to Mtweni. He's back with us from Boksburg. I hope better luck this time. Hello. Hi, Mtweni.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear us better now? No, Kibuloi. Kibuloi Mtweni Khwagan. We're going to have to let you go, my brother. I apologize. Thabo, let's just come back to the issue of having a new cohort, if you like, of a minister who will probably bring her own executive in trying to deal with matters of free higher education. In the immediate, though, the students are demanding that NFSAS loans be converted into bursaries. In the immediate, they're also saying that poorly performing students should not be excluded from accessing higher education. Your view?
Look, we have always said that NSFAS was the entry. The objective here is to get free education. Anything that subjects a poor person into a loan is a ridiculous system. You can't give a person you are classifying as poor, you are classifying as academically performing, and you say you are subjecting them to a loan. It's a wrong system. It was not supposed to be like that. I think that is a good call to say, scrap the NSFAS debt and provide and convert those into grants and provide a bursary. Because even if I were to graduate and finish, as many graduates have done, you are subjecting these people to having to pay a debt following their graduation. And most of them, they are unable to find jobs and so on. So we agree with that. The whole question of success of student passing, look, at SAPCO, we believe that all students who enter higher education must pass. Institutions of higher learning must provide support for all students to ensure that they pass. For example, we have a situation where students who are on SAICA, a chartered accountant training program, they have additional support to ensure that they pass. But students who are poor, who come from poor backgrounds, who don't have the necessary support, they are subjected to having to struggle in higher education. And most of them, obviously, they want to be able to pass. And that's why we always call that it's not just about access, it's also about the success of those people that are giving access. Because really, I think a person is better off if they don't go to higher education, and unlike a person who goes to higher education, enters higher education, forced to drop out because they don't have accommodation, they are poor, they don't have meals, and they don't have academic support. So all our campuses must have student development programs, which are a university-level program, facilitate and support students to pass. No one should be failing in higher education.
All right, please stay on the line. Harrison in Cape Town, good evening to you.
Yes, indeed. Njani?
Siyaphila singezwa nini?
Uyandukuva.
Uyandiva ngoku?
Sindi.
Webhuti.
Okay, singabe ndisithi abantwana mabangabe besokolisa besikolo. I-free education bazoyifumana kwi-EFF ngo-2019. I-EFF izoba decolonize na free education. I-EFF izothathela kuyo i-insurance, i-bank, imigodi. La mali le izonceda abantwana besikolo uba makuphuma i-free education. Kula mali yonke la.
But if i-EFF kaloku izafanele iwine
i-premier, i-president.
Okay.
Ukuziphumeza ezazithembiso bazithembisile.
All right, Mr. Harrison in Cape Town saying the EFF can bring free education. That's if they win the 2019 national general elections. But let's just go to and giving students a sense of hope, because as you're saying, this has been a perennial problem, and we've seen the worst conditions under which primarily black students had to live and having to fight for their right of existence and the right of education. That where does it stand now in terms of the pressure that needs to be put on government, on the public sector and private sector as well?
Well, I believe that the new, the incoming or the new minister, together with the deputy minister, must do things differently. They must come up with a tangible plan which will work to ensure that, we move forward. For example, also the vice chancellors from across the country have been stalling, have been creating problems, for transformation within the system itself. And, it has been quite a very huge problem. And, we believe that, the new cohort of ministers should do things differently and not necessarily, rely on advice from VCs across the country as the previous minister did. And
yeah, Thabo, just your view in terms of the autonomy of higher education institutions, and especially the criticism that they had been very resistant toward transformation. Is it a good idea to have the minister more micromanage or indeed interfere at that level?
Look, autonomy is not entirely fair. It depends whether people use it to stifle transformation or to support transformation. One of the good things that happened under the leadership of the previous minister, Blade, is that they amended the rules to allow the minister powers to intervene where institutions are refusing to transform. And I think that is a tool that the new minister will have in place to push transformation. The only problem becomes when some institutions, they use it against the very same transformation intention it seeks to do. I don't believe that institutions anymore must be like an apartheid government which used to run institutions of higher learning amok and do as they wish with them and train propagandists and support and so on. Institutions must have a level of autonomy, but that autonomy must not be used to stifle transformation. Where transformation is needed, it must happen, and if it's not happening, the minister must be able to use the Amendment Act, which were put in place by Minister Blade, and transform higher education.
And then the other issue of a national referendum, whether we need to have a vote on free higher education. What is your view? I'll start with you, Thabo.
I think that is a waste of time. We don't need a vote. We need a pronouncement on free education by the president. We must not go to... we voted for this government to provide free education. This government must provide free education. We can't go to another vote that says, remember, the ANC promised free education. So we can't go to... and the reason why people voted the ANC into power, the 62% of the voters, is because young people believe in what the ANC said in terms of free education. So we can't be going to another vote. Are you providing this or not? We just want the president to have the necessary political will, which we believe he has, to pronounce free education. We have said this year is the year of Oliver Tambo, the year of unity. It's also the year of free education for SASCO.
All right, thank you so much, Thabo Moloja, SASCO President. And wrapping it up in studio with Mr. Hendrik Makaneta, education activist. The President would have to pronounce on certain imperatives or even demands from the students. Otherwise, we may just sit with another revolt.
Yeah, of course, we may sit with another revolt. And coming back to your question of the referendum, that will obviously depend on the response by the president. And if the response is not satisfactory, maybe we might have to go that route to make sure that we give people a chance to pronounce on the issue once and for all.
He doesn't have much of a leeway, though, elbow room to maneuver. As you're saying, it's long overdue.
Yeah, well, you never know what will happen, and nobody knew that today would be sitting with new ministers in the higher education terrain.
Yeah.
And of course, you never know what can happen. But we have full confidence in the ability of the president to look after the interests of students.
All right, we're going to leave it there.
Yes.
Mr. Makaneta, he's an education activist joining us in studio. And thanks for your calls at home. Of course, a very worrying subject we're dealing with, access to free higher education for the predominantly poor black students. Thanks indeed for your contribution. We take a quick ad break. We'll see you shortly.